It is 11:30 on the Daphne, do you feel like we're good to go?
Perfect. We're gonna do some housekeeping here real quickly. Welcome. We're very excited to have you all join us for the second seat at the table. This conversation is going to be in celebration of Black History Month, and we are talking about transforming barriers into opportunities. Some housekeeping as we move along here. Is check your mic button. Make sure that your mic is silent so we can hear the speaker. Submit your questions in the chat box, and between myself and Kate and Stephen, we'll watch and make sure we get some good conversation going. And also, if you could do me a favor and mark DesMoinesArtsFestival.org as a safe sender in your email address. Most of those emails will come from myself, which is ddickens@DesMoinesArtsFestival.org, or info@DesMoinesArtsFestival.org, along with SK, which is Stephen King, who's our executive director. I know there's been some of our emails getting stuck in junk emails just because of that .org. So if you could do us a favor and make sure you mark those as safe senders, so you all receive our emails about a seat at the table, as well as Artist Inc. information. So moving forward, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kate, who is the facilitator for this round. Go ahead, Kate.
Good morning. Thanks, Daphne. Good morning, audience. Thank you so much for joining us for a seat at the table, conversations in regard to cultural equity in the arts. This is our second event. Our first seat at the table was Q4 of 2020. And so I'm sure like many of you, we are very happy to be in 2021 and moving forward. Again, we're so excited to have all of you. I scrolled through all of the friendly faces on, and we're just so excited to have you here today. So A Seat at the Table is a virtual series that's sponsored by the Des Moines Arts Festival. And as Daphne said, today's event is in celebration of Black History Month. We're very excited to have an incredibly talented expert panel that I'll be introducing to everyone here shortly. Today, you'll have the opportunity to hear from the panel about diverse perspectives and experiences in regard to transforming barriers into opportunity. So before I go any further, I want to take a few seconds and introduce the Executive Director of the Des Moines Arts Festival, Stephen King. Stephen, would you like to say a few words to our audience this morning?
Hi, Kate. Thank you. Thank you all so much. I want to echo Kate's thanks for everyone joining us today. I hope everybody is staying warm. And I want to thank you all for the conversation. This is really an important step for our community. And it won't be the last time that we get together. And we hope that all of you will continue the conversation when we go offline today. So let's keep talking. Let's keep communicating about this. It's important. It's important to all of us. It's important to our future. And I really want to give a big shout out to our panel today, and especially Kate. Thank you so much for all the leadership that you've been providing for us as an organization and as a community. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Stephen. So without any further delay, we're going to move forward to the heart of the conversation today. I want to start with just a little bit of laying some groundwork for everyone in order to have this conversation. And one thing that I continue to hear is that the terms diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, cultural competence, these are all terms that I see being used fairly interchangeably, especially in recent times. I'd like to briefly define the differences. There are a number of different interpretations that exist, of course, but I wanted to share my thoughts about some of the different terminologies. And although abbreviated, I think it might be really helpful just in regard to being able to have a meaningful conversation today. So when we think about diversity, very briefly, diversity is really the mosaic or collage of people who bring a variety of backgrounds, perspectives, beliefs, ideas, similarities, differences, and the like. And, you know, the key to diversity is really that all of these differences are assets to any organization. And that value in diversity is really important when we look at diversity as an asset. Inclusion, in many ways, is the mix of diversity. It's what ignites diversity to its highest and best use. It has to do with the ways in which opportunities and decision-making interactions are all configured in any given community or organization. And equity, of course, is the uplift of justice, impartiality. And it really, you know, symbolically, equity is the rising of all boats at the same time. So when we talk about accessibility, that really gets at the heart of what our conversation today has to do with, and that has to do, like Daphne said, like we've all faced many times for different reasons, are those barriers. And when you really look up the definition of what a barrier is, it's pretty simple. A barrier is, there are a number of definitions: a fence or other obstacle preventing movement or access, or anything built or serving to bar passage. And additionally, a barrier is something such as a rule, a law, or policy that makes it difficult or impossible for something to happen or be achieved. And so, again, today's conversation is about transforming barriers into opportunities. You know, I think all of us are aware that there are many challenges, but we really want to use today's time to focus on the solution and how to transform those barriers. So instead of focusing on the problem, we want to focus on the outcome and really being able to achieve our dreams, whatever that may be. And so without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists, because of course, the reason you're all here today is to listen to them. So first and foremost, I'd like to introduce H.C. Porter. H.C., thank you so much for being here. If this were in person, I'd say you've come a long way. You've traveled a long distance, but because this is all virtual, you're right here with us. And if you can share with us a little bit about yourself or anything that you'd like our audience to know.
Wow. Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. And I've just lost everybody's images and it's gone to my work. So I'm feeling quite honored at the moment. But as a community, you guys are so fortunate. I've shown for years in the Des Moines Arts Festival and felt such a warm welcome and response to my work. But in starting, there's a quote that I'd like to share by fellow native Mississippian Eudora Welty, writer and photographer, much older than I and now passed. But she said, "My passion would not be to point a finger in judgment, but to part a curtain, that invisible shadow that falls between people, the veil of indifference to each other's wonder and each other's human plight." Now, Daphne selected this just little smattering of pieces from quite a collection of work. Over the years, I've documented not just Mississippi, my studio neighborhood, where I started in 1987. I started a studio on a place called Millsaps Avenue. It's kind of a midtown neighborhood. I had just returned from the University of Alabama with a painting degree, and I was trying to figure out how I would make a living as a young artist. I had briefly worked for a studio and made $2.75 an hour, and I had to choose between milk and bread. So at this point, after I now held my college degree, I was excited to try to figure out how I could go forward and where my work would go. And I landed in sort of a new arts community, Millhouse Avenue, Midtown neighborhood, predominantly Black community. The kids every day stream into my studio wanting to paint, wanting to color. And it was like, okay, how could we do this? How could we bring art, not just my daily painting practice, but how could we bring it to this new community where I had landed? And I applied for, it's called a community block grant, and it was $500. And that allowed us to buy basic supplies and come up with a way to keep the kids entertained for an hour and a half or so. We did it for 8 weeks, focused on 8 to 12-year-olds directly in this underserved community. Many of them didn't have art in the public school system. So this was an opportunity to not just show them the way to draw or to paint or to create, but that you could create and then go further with that and actually make a living and sell work. So that was kind of the opportunity that I saw working with these kids initially. I mean, we would do found object printmaking where we would walk through the neighborhood and collect trash that was in the streets. It would be interesting. And we'd bring it back to the studio where I had taped literally with masking tape on my studio floor 2 by 3 foot little squares. I'd be like, okay, everybody, you got to get in your square or your rectangle and let's see what we can do. So we learned balance and color, composition by inking all of this found material. We did mask making. We did these really cool totem poles. We just brought the kids into the art experience. And then culminated with a show at the end of that 8-week period where we invited the community. Wow, these kids, $40 after selling 2 pieces of work. It was a moment to recognize you can be creative and you can sell. And you can have money at the end of that. So the whole process just completely changed my life, my life's focus. Up until then, I had been doing some sort of abstract pieces, but I've been photographing my kids, silk screening the image so you get this high contrast black and white image and bring the color back on top of it.
I love your work, and you, just so you know, folks in the chat box are wanting pieces of your work. So we may need to come up with a way to get access to some of your work for our audience. I love your story, and we'll get back to you here in just a second. So thank you so much for introducing yourself. Jason Wells is here with us today from the Des Moines Symphony. Jason, we'd love to listen to your art and hear from you, whatever you'd like to share with the audience about who you are and your journey.
Sure, yeah. And I will start with playing a little short thing, and then I'll kind of get into my history. I feel like that's the best way to do the order of things. So this is a short piece that I wrote about a year ago. So.
Just a bass.
That was amazing. So many of you don't know that, or you may know, that would be wrong for me to assume that, but this is a very hard instrument. I'm kind of a music junkie myself, and this is a fretless bass, so pitch, accuracy is all quite difficult. So really nice intonation, by the way.
Oh, thank
So
you.
we'd love to hear what you'd like to share with our audience about who you are.
Sure, yeah. So, kind of to get started, I started playing, not this particular instrument, but I started playing the bass when I was 10 years old in fourth grade. I just picked out an instrument in the class because we had to play an instrument for a couple of years in school. And then I really was drawn to this instrument because of the low sounds, and I thought it was cool at the time. I had a really high pitched voice. I remember plucked a low E string. I was like, "That's cool," So everything else was like super high and screechy. So I was immediately drawn to the bass, and then I found, a couple of years later when I started taking lessons, a really enthusiastic teacher. And I feel like through working with my teacher, shout out to Dale Anderson, through working with my teacher for the next few years, I really developed a passion for bass, and really took me to getting into different music spaces, and playing pieces that to this day I think like really moved me and changed my life. And it's led me to now where I've played with the Des Moines Symphony, and then I do quite a bit of teaching, especially now during the quarantine. I have more time to focus on teaching, and the big thing that I think that drives me now is to try to give to others that kind of motivation that I received from my first teacher. So to see if I can believe in others and things like that, and help them to develop some sort of skill, that they can have, something that they can have and hold on to.
So Jason, I will tell you that you must have a student on. I have a comment that you're an incredible teacher, and I am going to go with that. Lots of compliments about the beautiful music you shared with the audience. Jason is also with us, but not physically that close to us right now. So Jason is in the Twin Cities, and then spends a lot of time during symphony weeks here in Des Moines. So we're so excited to have you here, Jason. Thank you for sharing that music with the audience.
Yeah,
And last but absolutely not least, Emmett Phillips. And Emmett is here today with a very special guest, Ozjed. And Emmett, I will let you introduce yourself, share with the group what you'd like everyone to know, and then Ozjed can introduce herself as well.
Okay, cool. And I'll give Ozjed a little mini introduction, to ease her in. But yes, thank you for welcoming me. My name is Emmett. I've been a pretty active part of the Des Moines community in the arts and education field for like pretty much most of my adult life. When I was like around in middle school, I found my passion for the arts. The first art I fell in love with was hip hop by way of battle rap. I was that kid that was taking every opportunity, whether it's sports games, whether it's in the hallways between class, to find somebody that would beatbox for me so I can get some rhymes off, and find someone who can kick something back. And it was always love. I found out that arts, especially hip hop, is a community builder. It's a way to exercise your mind. It's a way to connect with folks. It's a way to be intelligent, be witty, be crafty. And I fell in love with it at a young age. But throughout high school and going into college, I never really thought that I could do anything with it. I thought that I'd have to, get some, more widely accepted profession and kind of dive into that. But, the arts never left me. So I remember my transition into arts education was when I was around like 19. I was in the Army National Guard, and I was in ROTC at the time, going to Grandview. And like hip hop is on the back burner. I'm doing my, my Army and my college stuff, full force. But I started volunteering at a Boys and Girls Club while I was doing school and working. And I found a way to start teaching some arts there. Like I kind of just started injecting it into my daily routine there. And I saw how it spoke to the kids. I wasn't there to teach art, but I found a way to teach art. And I've never stopped since then. Like the kids loved it too much. I saw too much like self-esteem and self-confidence brewing in these small little art activities, little drama activities, little hip hop games. So I was like, okay, this is serious. I need to find more ways to do this. So, fast forwarding into, my years, I'm 27 now, and I have about 8 years of arts education experience. And I'm currently based at Oak Ridge with Lil Sis Ajed, and we are actively, at least 2 to 3 times a week, we are writing scripts, we are creating, we are acting, we are performing, we are expressing ourselves. And that is my cup of tea. Performance arts, poetry, hip hop, theater, I'm in love with it. And Oak Ridge has been a great avenue because the whole team here, the whole staff is behind doing what works for the kids, and these kids live for this. So I want to transition into introducing Ajed. And before I tell y'all about her creative side, I gotta let y'all know. So I've worked with Ajed since I first started at Oak Ridge. I started a program called Oh Yeah, which stands for Oak Ridge Young and Educated Artists. And she was one of my early participants. And we were basically creating performances to perform around the neighborhood and perform in the schools. And Ajed, if I'm correct, you haven't missed not one performance we've done, right?
Nope.
So she has about 6 shows under her belt, about I don't know, like several a couple hundred people she's performed in front of. And she's a great example of what the arts can do for young people. And she's also a great basketball player and football player, because at Oak Ridge I've coached her in flag football and basketball, and she's just a whole beast. So with no further ado, here's Ajed to introduce herself a little bit too.
Hello, my name is Austin. Okay. Hello, my name is Austin, and I love to do acting because it's fun and you get to be creative. And I also play sports, and when it comes to sports, I play any sport.
Wonderful. Ajed, thank you so much for joining us today. Ajed, am I correct that you're in the 5th grade?
Yeah.
Yep. And you're 10, is that right? Yeah. And you were sharing with me earlier before this started where you were born and your journey in regard to your arrival that we are also fortunate to share with you here in Des Moines. Can you tell the audience a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I just want to know about like your story, about like how you got to Oak Ridge from where you started.
Like what?
Yeah, just whatever you want to tell them about, back home till you getting here.
Oh.
Yeah.
I used to stay home, and I didn't come. I used to just watch TV all day, and then Mr. William came and he signed me up for okay. And then I started at the main building, and then when I got older, I came to the teen center, and that's when I met Mr. E. And then he started the group Oh Yeah Academy, and then that's when it started. That's when it all started.
Can you tell them anything about when you weren't living even in America, like before Oak Ridge? Yeah, just a little. You don't got to go too much, but a little bit about that.
Well, I didn't know anything. I was big.
Oh, you was a baby? Okay.
Yeah.
She was a baby.
That is absolutely fair that you were a baby and you may not remember. I will say that Emmett shared with me that Asjad was born, I believe, in Syria and is Sudanese and came to the United States, some years ago. But we are thrilled, like I said, to have you here. So Emmett, would you please, or Daphne, I think, we're going to, HC and Jason both shared art with the audience, and we would like to share Emmett and Asjad's art with the audience as well.
Got a mission, I ain't started yet. Have a plan to be an architect. Opportunities are hard to get. This is gonna be my hardest test. I can't waste my time. Gotta stay on my grind. They ain't taking my shine. Kept it real in each line. My name is Nani. I be shooting those priests. I be sussing them up. They be falling out they feet. My mom inspired me to be the best that I can be. I bring that heat and I still be on fleek.
My protest, lead myself cause I know best. Reppin' Oak Ridge like oh yes. Got some young students about to go next.
We're unlocking our power.
Yeah.
Getting better by the hour.
Yeah.
Getting bigger like a flower.
Yeah.
Standing taller than a tower.
Yes, my cess, my protest. Lead myself cause I
Fantastic. I will say that Daphne will probably put the link to that video. I think there was a little bit of a delay, but I will tell you, I've watched that video since I first saw it maybe a week ago. I probably watched it a dozen times. The folks on that video are so talented, it will give you chills to watch our young people be so creative and so energetic. I absolutely love it. All right, wonderful. Well, we've met the panelists, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. So we're going to get right to the heart of the conversation. And again, this is about really understanding how to transform barriers into opportunities. One of the things I love about finding a seat at the table is really not focusing on the problem or the barrier or the challenge. We do have to acknowledge what that is in order to find our path forward, but we are inspired to find how to transform those challenges into opportunities so that everyone can see themselves as achieving, everyone can see themselves as whatever their dream is for them. We're gonna dig right in and start with a tough question to HC first. And, HC, you and I have talked a little bit, and I can only imagine that at different times, people have really questioned, and I'm just gonna throw it out there, why is a white woman so invested in creating art that focuses on the Black community? And there are a lot of conversations around this topic, and whether or not it's co-opting, whether it's patronizing, whether it's, there's so many different thoughts and biases out there about that journey. And you've shared with me some really amazing experiences and about the barriers that you face and how you've transformed them into your own opportunities. So can you tell us a little bit more about what that's been like for you?
Thanks for the opportunity to talk about it. Just to make the leap, make sure everybody understood how my move to Midtown created a life of work for me was because I saw Millsaps Avenue. It was like I've always said, the artist Mondrian saw line and color, and Picasso saw cubes. And for me, as an artist, I saw Millsaps Avenue. And in creating the relationships with these families and community, being directly involved for all those years of active. Of course, we weren't just, dealing with art and art challenges and art projects. It was also dealing with access to attorneys on some levels. I mean, just day-to-day problems that people saw us as, okay, you're in our neighborhood, you're working with my children, and you can also help be a point person for our daily life and our struggles. But through that relationship, I'm not only a painter, I started as a photographer. I was given a camera when I was 16, had a dark room, and I studied photography through college and then put it together with printmaking to use it as an image to silkscreen and then bringing the color back on top of it. So that's the process that you're seeing. And if you'll see in the work, first thing people ask me through the years, and this is 33 years of creating work with the high contrast silkscreen, why do you leave the faces white? If you notice that when you look at my work, doesn't matter if it's Hispanic, Vietnamese, Black, white, it's always a reference to just the process. People would say, are you trying to tell me something? I'm like, no, it's just the process. Because I bring so much color to the image, I want people to recognize that there is a silkscreen, a printmaking process under the whole thing. So that's why it's black and white. So in saying that, what I tried to do with my work was give people an opportunity to heal through telling their story. And I don't think it mattered that I was a white person. I would walk down the street, it's like, hey, see, it's like, it didn't matter. It was, how are you doing today? And then, can you take my picture? This is my baby. Can you take my picture? Or can you, it's our wedding anniversary or whatever. And it was just, I was creating a family album of people that I experienced every day and enjoyed. And it found my way into my work. One of the barriers I think you're talking about, and I don't think it was a barrier per se, but I was doing a show in New York City at the Javits Center, hundreds of artists, and the show directors had made the decision to create an African-American section within the show. And this was probably in the mid-90s. Well, many of those artists I had shown with, whether it was in Atlanta or Houston or wherever, and they were familiar with me and my work and my voice. They're like, why aren't you over here with us? It's like, well, the head people had made that decision to create sort of a separate thing. Now, they were seeing my voice as an artist and not looking at my skin color. So that was I being discriminated against for being white because I wasn't in the African-American section, or how, we're all just trying to walk this path. What is it better for everybody just to be integrated and we all represent and have our voice as a collective? Or is it better that they're separated? You're going to have the Asian Americans and this and then that, the sections.
So Chris, I love your transparency and willingness to show some vulnerability in having this conversation, because I think this is a conversation that's not easy to have. And I think a lot of, it's delicate sometimes. And, one of the things I will say about diversity when we first introduced the event today is that, diversity, so the traditional way of thinking about diversity does silo these different buckets of demographics, as you're talking about, African-American art in one room, Asian art in another room. But really what I think this group wants to do, and what, hopefully many of us can help drive in regard to momentum, is simply that by continuing to think about diversity in these monolithic buckets, only further reinforces those structures. And so while there are definitely times when it's appropriate to lift up and prop up and honor right? Certain artists, for whatever reason that is, we would all like to hopefully move to a place where we consider diversity a broad mix, just simply that collage of people, similar to color, that, you know, that we see in your artwork. You know, Emmett, you and HC had a great conversation about this topic, and one of the remarks that you or things that you discussed was the dynamic about people of different backgrounds being passionate about certain types of art. And wondering if you can expand upon that a little bit, Emmett, and just in regard to your thoughts about what HC shared.
Yes, absolutely. And I also will kick it to Osjed after this, you know, to see what she thinks. But I know as a young person, the people who made the most significant impact on me didn't always look like me. Now I value, you know, as much as I can, getting representation in my education system. But when I can't, especially being in the state with the ethnic makeup of Iowa, the second best thing is to have someone who loves what they're teaching and is willing to understand me and respect me and connect with me. I have a few teachers in mind that stand out as people that got me interested in writing. I had fantastic creative writing teachers that were from a different background and probably completely different socioeconomic status. Like, but they were able to reach something in me, and that's always been something that has moved me and has helped me get forward. I've never been too caught up in what people looked like. It was more about how authentic you are and how true to your purpose you are and how well you can translate that to others. And I think that's the foundation. I know at Osjed school, like at Edmonds, about 90, at least somewhere around 90% of the teachers do not look like her. And I want to actually ask Osjed about how you feel, how that affects you, or, you know, if it affects you, or in what way.
It doesn't.
And you can put your mask on. So they can hear you.
It doesn't affect me. Okay.
Yes.
It doesn't affect me, but it's all right. But I don't know.
You can keep it real. They want to learn, Osjed. You know, they want to know what's up.
I mean, it feels normal. I don't feel like different about anything. Like, it's like we're all family.
Do you feel, Osjed, do you feel that having teachers that don't always look like you stands in the way of you having a meaningful relationship with the teachers?
All right. Did you guys catch her response? Okay. All right. Well, one more time.
I said, no, not really.
Good. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing. I know these are, some of these are probably difficult questions to answer on the spot. But Emmett, I really love what you're talking about, you know, the dynamic that you're somebody that sees the authenticity
Yes.
before you do any of the other demographic characteristics that make up who we are as people. And that's one of the things I absolutely adore about you, is that you're such an authentic voice. And Emmett, you got a lot of fans on this event today. So a lot of folks are shouting out that they value your passion and energy that you bring to the Des Moines community. And I honestly think that your perception of barriers and not seeing those diversity elements or the differences as barriers, but seeing them as doors to opportunity.
Yes.
Seeing that if somebody's authentic, regardless of what they look like, they can open a door to an opportunity just like anyone else.
Yes.
And so I really appreciate you sharing that.
And Kate, can I say one quick thing? Yes, I do value the importance of representation. But I took that internally and became that. Like I don't focus too much on the fact that it's lacking. Like I wanted kids to like see someone like me. I want them to see me, not somebody like me. Like I care about it, so I put myself in it. Like that's what I believe is powerful. It's very important, but people got to come from their own center to put themselves in these places. Like don't just do it because you look like a certain way. You know, you got to come with it from the heart. Okay, that's
Oh, no, I love that. Thanks for adding that, Emmett.
all right.
Jason, what are your thoughts about what HC and Emmett have shared in regard to some of the topics we're discussing? And don't forget to unsilence Jason.
Yeah, so I kind of like want to echo Emmett's sentiment in that way that you know, in my experience, you know, that teacher that I referenced in the opening, he's like, you know, was a Jewish dude who had a big influence upon my life. And the thing that was such an influence about him was the passion. So, you know, Emmett's characterization of that, it's like, that's like dead on for me, where it's like I responded because I felt like I was getting genuine energy from that person. And I feel like that's the biggest component of this thing that we're talking about, inclusion and things like that. And it really comes down to seeing people, seeing each other. Now, I would say that where this becomes tricky is that sometimes it's hard for us to see each other who are alike, right? So it becomes more challenging to see people who might be different from you, who have a different kind of experience from than you, and that's where I think some of these conversations come in, where it's like there's this assumption that however, you know, I may have gone through life is how everybody went through life, and there's an oversimplification of how life is. And you know, I find it, and sometimes listening to people talk, that they're just that oftentimes some nuance gets missed, and like people are complicated, is what I say. And I've spent a lot of time, and you know, kind of looking at my past and things I've done. It's like kind of seems random, all the different spaces I've gone up, you know, gone and been in, and different kind of cultures that I've been around. But I've learned that people, you know, there's some commonalities with people, but then there's a lot of difference, you know. So like it's, but there's like a heart at the heart of it. There's something that I always respond to, which is like people's passion, people being genuine.
Yep. I love that, Jason. Again, you know, one thing I like about what you talked about is that, you know, sometimes it's easy to see the differences. But that's where, you know, again, when I briefly went over the definition of the word diversity, I think that many times how we perceive diversity will make the difference as well. So if we see diversity as a value add, as an asset, as something that makes us all better people for myriad of reasons, then diversity or differences may not be so threatening or scary or uncomfortable. Again, it's finding that intersectionality and really going beyond some of the different characteristics that may separate us based on appearance, right? Or other social constructs that categorize us, and really getting past all of that and focusing on the energy and the passion and the genuine spirit of someone, or the authenticity that someone brings. So,
And I want to add one thing to that,
sure.
which is that, you know, for when we talk about diversity and inclusion, like the biggest thing that has to be there is like it has to be a genuine desire to know one another. Sometimes this conversation gets in that where it's like out of like almost like a fear. It's like, well, we gotta have this conversation, you know, like people telling me that we have to have this conversation. It's like, no, there has to be a genuine desire to understand one another. And like that for me seems like the start, the starting point. And as an educator, I feel like you get that and you can respond to that. And I think a lot of teachers have that desire, but it needs to expand out into how we all go about business per se.
No, I appreciate your added comment. In fact, I think I'd like to go ahead and focus on you for a second, Jason. So, interestingly, when we talk about seeing oneself, right? The symphony is a wonderful place to have that conversation. I will tell you, similarly to the Williams sisters or to Tiger Woods, or I mean, that's just a few of so many. The fact that there is a professional Black male bassist that won an audition for the Des Moines Symphony and is here today is an incredible. I am so excited that you're here, and because I'm a musician, I think it actually is a little more prolific to me. But the fact that you offer that image for so many young people is really an amazing thing that should be celebrated. So the symphony is interesting because when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, the symphony, in my opinion, is one of the organizations who really adopted inclusive or equitable hiring practices long before much of this was even a conversation. So for any of you that don't know, professional symphony auditions are done, they call them blind auditions. And what that means is that there is a screen, the panel of judges cannot see who is playing. And that's a wonderful thing because it takes away the physical judgment or the bias that can be attributed to seeing someone. Some symphonies even took it another step further, realizing that there was still the opportunity for bias when the panel would hear footsteps walking across the stage. Oftentimes they could distinguish whether it was a male or a female auditioning. And so many symphonies have it now to where the person auditioning is seated ahead of time before the panel even comes in the room. So understanding that piece of the symphony and that the symphony is really ahead of its time in regard to the equitable sort of job application process, for lack of better words. I think there are other interesting dynamics within classical music, specifically dealing with accessibility that sort of bubble to the surface. So Jason, can you share with us what your thoughts are about classical music and really what it means to do what you do?
Sure.
And I know that accessibility is one of your key objectives that you would like to see improve
Right.
in regard to classical music.
Now, in classical music, I think that as you're talking about, the blind audition process was definitely a big leg up for the industry. In the way that before that, you could guess that it was all white men in the orchestra, and then they started doing this blind audition, and you have the orchestra that you see now, which has pretty much 50-50 between women and men, and then you have a little bit of diversity, and that's the part that hasn't quite caught up, and I feel like there's some reasons for that. So for me, I feel like a big part of that, my classical training and how I was able to get to where I got from was a big part. My parents were a big part of that. And like when I was growing up and there was things like that, if there was a book that I needed, when it was time to get an instrument and things like that, my parents were like, yeah, let's go. Like here's what you need. Like we'll get that right away. And there's a privilege to that part where I was able to have everything that I need. And as I go in and I teach, that's not always the case. And as we know, that has to do with socioeconomic aspects to a certain degree, and that's unequal. That aspect there's still a lot of work to be done in the classical education realm, which is funding. Educate, you can spread that out to, like, it's just getting the money.
Yep. And like you said, accessibility is key to that. Certain activities have a price tag to them, and I think that's a barrier that we're continuing to figure out ways to transform into opportunities. And I think another thing that I really like about what you said was simply you acknowledging your own, I'm sorry, I have an emergency vehicle. And simply you acknowledging your own privilege, right? Because I think there's this perception that there's only something called white privilege. And again, all these kinds of things do is continue to reinforce and articulate prior structures that are in place. But really, for you to acknowledge that part of your accessibility did come from your own background of privilege, I think is something that's valuable, because it helps you to see that there are other barriers for people, and we need solutions to those. And for those reasons, I think HC, what you've done and really opened a center for art to take place is one way to help people gain access. So if you can piggyback a little bit off of what Jason was talking about in regard to accessibility to art, what's your perspective? What have you done? And in regard to barriers, how do you see where are the opportunities at in turning these barriers around for a lot of our young people?
Well, I think one of the important things that he said is about being creative and see those other people, the creativity of yourself in that person, being able to see that. So I think with my work that I was able to represent visually this community, that they could see their story being told and continue to now, that they could say, wow, I could also access that. I could also do that. When you talked about the blind audition, it's funny when I'm in a show and let's say you're at Des Moines Arts Festival, you walk through and you don't see the artist, but you only see the work. And then I present myself. You did this? Generally, people expect me to be a male, H.C. Porter. And then seeing my work, they also expect me to be a Black male, H.C. Porter, with my work. And I'm like, yes, I did. They're like, you did this? So I recognize that I'm bringing something community of value that people can respond to themselves, and that they're surprised that it's a white person that's able to bring their experience to these images is exciting for me, that I'm doing something right. I had a gentleman in his 60s standing in my booth with tears running down his face. And he just said, I said, are you okay? And he said, you've captured my life. I mean, of course, not his specific life, but his experience of his life and his memories. And for me, it didn't matter if somebody came through and said, why are you doing this? You shouldn't be doing this. Because the good and the supportive and what I knew to be the truth of what I was doing would continue to ring through for me. That again, that there's healing in the telling and the being heard, and that's what my work was about. So specifically to access barriers, and you just have to continue, you get on your line, you start on your line, not on somebody else's line, because then you don't know where to go. You have to start on your own personal line. I'm sure Emmett's done that and Jason's done that. And then you know, this is the next step that I have to take. And that's what we all have to be open to, is that creative experience of Black, white, whatever. You have to find what is your voice. So I can only speak to it as somebody who has visually been a storyteller for years and haven't.
No, I love, thanks for sharing that, HC. I can only imagine, I'm sure we've all experienced something similar to, I've walked into job interviews and people want to know where Kate is, or they like to, once they've seen me, they like to spell my last name as Asian looking as possible. So I'm adopted, my parents are German, but people love to try and spell Hightshoe as HY-CHOO or something to that impact. So I can definitely relate to your story. I think one of the things we're learning is that in many ways, all of us are opportunities, right? So the opportunity lives on through all of us. And that's one of the beautiful things about art. You know, Jason teaches, you have so much community collaboration in your space. Emmett, wondering what you and Ozjed can add to that conversation in regard to accessibility. And specifically, if you can talk a little bit about the Des Moines community. HC and Jason are familiar with Des Moines, but they don't live here full time. So that's something unique about you. And I would just love to hear your thoughts in regard to our own community here.
Okay, so as far as accessibility to the arts, I think that just traditionally, outside of like specific teachers, and I have a lot of respect for the teachers in the Des Moines public school system, but to me, I've seen accessibility being augmented by outside organizations, or even like branches of things like I think of organizations like Culture All. Culture All is a nonprofit that injects arts and culture that's led by people of diverse, backgrounds into these systems. Movement 515, is like a branch of Des Moines Public Schools learning, but it's almost like a separate entity that makes sure kids are getting hip hop, poetry, and these cultural experiences, and it's embedded in it, so I have seen that. I don't know what Des Moines would be like if individuals and organizations didn't take initiative to like create something and put it in these places. Because traditionally, I would say, it's pretty obvious Des Moines hasn't been, overabundant in these areas. But I've been very satisfied with what I've seen as far as people responding to these areas. And I love also being a catalyst for it myself. I know what it's like for my program not to be in existence at Oak Ridge to now it's a few years old, and we have all these kids that have been involved with it and are making, it's a part of their life story now. And it feels like a good start. And then the other thing about accessibility I think of is me and Ozjed were just talking as we're watching HC present her artwork. I'm over here like, Ozjed, does that look cool to you? Is that something you'd want to do? Okay, bet. Let me hit her up and see if she'd want to come share that, do a Zoom or come teach. Jason, I'm like, hey, you like that big bass? I know it's bigger than your head, but he might, if he could teach it to you, I know he's in Minnesota and everything. Would you be cool with learning that? So it's like, that's how I view this. Like, accessibility is, we have to make it happen. We have to network with people who care and who have the talents to do it. And we can keep making it more, making Des Moines or these pockets of these communities more vibrant with the arts. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Wonderful. HC, can you talk a little bit more about what Emmett just explained to the group? Maybe expand upon the idea about youth, how all of us as individuals can continue to be opportunities to barriers for young folks. What can all of us do as individuals that actually move the needle. I will say, you know, some of the comments that I often hear is, okay, this is great. This is a great starting point, but what next? And what are the action items that actually move the needle? How are we going to take barriers down so that more people can have a seat at the table? And yeah, how do you see that for yourself?
Well, I think you have to continue to have access, as we talked about earlier, to money. I mean, that was the first thing. It was a small community arts grant, and it was $500. The next thing I knew, the Jackson, Mississippi mayor was there when we would do a small children's opening, and the support from the community of actually spending and buying from these kids. We set it up just like a gallery, 50-50. You know, the gallery gets 50%, the children get 50%. So they experience the real life world of what arts communities, how they function. But so, and then with an eye toward opening projects, artists and residences, just like he just said, Emmett just said, what could we do to collaborate and bring my experience and projects to his kids? I don't know. Again, my work has always just been sort of a practice. I've never had to spend that much time when there was an issue. We just walked through it. Like when I was put the project together about Mississippians on the Gulf Coast after Hurricane Katrina. I was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Hurricane Katrina wiped out the entire 90 miles of the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And as an artist creating work about Mississippi, people, if you'll remember, were glued to the television, but they came out to the show and they're like, wow, your work speaks so well of Mississippi. Why aren't you at home? So we have to see and point to opportunities. I didn't see that opportunity. The community told me that. I was in DC the next weekend and a female attorney walked in and said, I don't know what you have to do, but you need to go home to Mississippi. This is a national disaster and it's in your backyard. Go figure out how to tell the story. And finally, it was like, wow, okay, God, I think I'm going home to Mississippi to find out how to tell a story of what's happening on the coast. And I spent a year down there documenting not just the Black community, but Hispanic and Vietnamese, to tell the story of what we had lost and who we were as Mississippians. That was just creating opportunity and being aware of the stories that are going on around you and how you want to tell that. And it's, you know, in every community, we all can look around and say, okay, how do we want to step into a creative pocket here?
You know, I'm curious, have you ever felt as though your focus on communities of color within your artwork has created a barrier for you in regard to access to the white communities? Have you ever felt as though, have you ever experienced any of that? You know, I hate to call it reverse because that would imply that they're the same, and we know they're not. But can you talk a little bit about that space and that relationship, and whether it's been difficult for you to navigate or how you've worked through it?
I can tell you one story. I was doing a show in Birmingham, Alabama. And just to be clear and transparent, as you said, she happened to be a white lady of a certain age, walked in my booth, saw my work. She said, what would my maid think if I hung this work on my wall? I can't, it's hard to even say it at this point in my life, 57 years old. You know, it's like, really, lady? You can't recognize the beauty in this work and the presence that's here and the person this work is representing? And sure, you have an employee that would find that their reference on your wall would recognize that you recognize them, that you see them, and that you see their presence. And that's all I'm ever trying to do with my work, is to bring awareness to, as Eudora Welty said, to one another's human plight, human existence. And So beyond that, I never went back to Birmingham, Alabama to show my work, you know?
Oh,
It's
you
like,
know, HC, again, I have to thank you for your,
wipe my hands of that one.
yeah, I have to thank you for your vulnerability here. I'm a little emotional about what you just shared. Those situations are really difficult to navigate, and you feel them for a long time. You know, Jason, I think I'd like to ask you a similar question. Uh, you know, there are biases about classical music and what kind of music that is and for what kinds of people. And, you know, when we're talking about barriers, I think a lot of these biases or stereotypes about who classical music is for gets in the way. It not only gets in the way of young people seeing themselves as you, but it gets in the way of the symphony or various types of art continuing to bring in new audiences and explore new ideas and be innovative. So for you, I know the kinds of comments that were made to me coming up just from being a musician. But I'm just wondering, what have you experienced in regard to being Black and then being a classical musician? And, you know, have people, I'm guessing that you've experienced people assuming that when you say you play bass, they automatically jump to popular music or jazz or blues. And when you tell them you're a classical bassist and
Right.
they realize you don't have an electrical
Right.
amp attached, there are probably some barriers that come down right there. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. I always, yeah, that was very, very present in when growing up, and you know, a part of me, you know, I've always been the one that I really always wanted to tear that sentiment down, and I was really aware and conscious about that when I was growing up, to the point where like almost like I didn't pick up jazz until later. You know, my parents would attest to this. I didn't pick up jazz till later because I wanted to be a classical bassist, and like I wanted people to sit with it. You know, when I was growing up, because it was always, yeah, it was not what people expected. Um, and for me, it was there was never a doubt in my mind if this thing was for me or if I could do this thing. Cause I caught the bug. You know, I think it became more complicated as I got older. I was just so driven when I was younger by it. I had a lot of support that helped that drive early on. That helped kind of keep me focused on improving and getting better, so those barriers didn't grab hold. I would say that, you know, there's a time in my 20s where I stopped playing, and that's kind of where some of those things started weighing on me a little bit heavier. Um, and
Now, Jason, one thing you shared with me is that you've had an incredible experience with the Des Moines Symphony. In fact, at one point you were shared with me that you felt very welcome here.
yeah,
We talked a little bit about the inclusion piece and you know, what it was like for you to be a new member of the Des Moines Symphony. Um, you know, Richard's on here. I'm sure he's not paying attention whatsoever. But, you know, if you would be so kind as just to share with us a little bit about some of the really positive things you've experienced that you found unique about the Des Moines Symphony. And then, you know, just from the 1,000, you know, foot view, you know, what would you like to see? In Des Moines, you know, you've expressed interest in wanting to spend more time in this community. So
yeah.
what was your experience? What were some of the positive things that you feel make Des Moines unique? And then if there were some things that you would like to see in the future, what might those be?
Yeah, sure. I would say like, from playing in a lot of different orchestras in the region, because I also sub in a lot of orchestras, probably about a 4 hour radius from my home in Minneapolis. And one of the things that I find about Des Moines that is really nice is one, they have such almost a strong connection with the community here, which is not always the case in other places. And they're so dang organized as an organization. It's just um, um, everything is everything is very very clear, which is always for me in terms of like just being professional. That is such a large part of like just being able to day to day understand what's going on. And then there's a lot of like there's a lot of familiarity and people are very warm in the orchestra. And I came in, like I wasn't, this is one of the rare times where I came in and I wasn't the only black person in the section, even not let alone the orchestra, which is the typical thing. Because I came in and Patricia was a Brazilian bass player that was in the section. Shout out to Patricia, great bassist herself. But so that all of a sudden it creates an atmosphere. It's like, well, what's going on here? So those aspects really helped out, and I think from there it will be the symphony, getting out into the community is always the thing, and like I think lowering the I think classical can always kind of talk and exist in this kind of abstract way. Sometimes the way that classical is talked about, I see as being some of the problem, where like bringing classical down to earth, almost is in the way that when you go into schools and things like that, where people aren't familiar with classical, it's like just like I don't know if it's like relating it to other music and like being more in connection with what's going on now, but just finding that way to connect classical to like it's back to its roots, strip it of all of the history components, because that's always and just present it as the music that it is, which is how I connect with it. The history of classical music is hard for me to get into, I'll say, and like that's and I think that's always been the struggle for me, because it's like a lot of this is like learning a history that's not mine, and just to be really straight up, that's a hard part for me to get into, and I sometimes have an inner desire to push back to like, if you don't know the history and how all this stuff happens, that you can't accurately play this music, and like that there has to be this lineage and things like that. And I was like, yes, I think there to a certain degree there has to be some understanding, but then that's going to shut people out if that has to be there, like because that kind for me that there's a problematic nature to that.
Yeah, Jason, I agree. I think part of, there's always been this conversation of highbrow, lowbrow art, right? And I think that's kind of what you're talking about. And I know that the Des Moines Symphony, as many of the arts, culture, and heritage organizations here in Des Moines, not only are invested in diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility initiatives, but it's definitely part of your strategic vision and strategic plan. And so I have a lot of confidence that we'll continue to move in those directions. I do have a question from the audience. And Emmett, I think I'd like to ask you and Ozjed, the question here is from Lindsay and Iowa Public Radio. And what she would like to know is what can Iowa Public Radio do to help in these efforts? What can Iowa Public Radio do to remove barriers, or how can radio serve as an opportunity? And I thought you'd be great to discuss that because, again, as someone who's been a musician, man, I really wish that there were more radio stations who would play the music of local artists of all backgrounds. So, Emmett, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about how radio can be a great tool.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm gonna let Ozja was just saying, like, she was like, this is one of the easiest questions been said. We, and guys, y'all gotta understand, like, this conversation, like, some of these words are at a, higher level. So I'm gonna talk to her, in private about what everything means, but she's hanging in there with us. Ozja, I'm kicking this one to you, okay? So Iowa Public Radio, they have a reach, they have a platform to share, what would you want to do with them if they were gonna support us?
Maybe like
You can put your mask down and try to talk directly to them.
maybe we could like put like success in our protest, and like probably a lot of people are gonna be inspired, and maybe we could just talk about how like we're not really that different, and we could all be equal. Yeah.
Were y'all able to guess that?
Emmett, can you repeat some of that?
Yes. Put your mask down and speak like the stage voice.
Okay.
Give it to him.
Okay. So maybe if like we could put like if we could talk like we're not that different from other people, and like we could all be equal, and maybe a lot of people are gonna like want to agree and like post it and stuff like that to go around.
Okay. And also, can you repeat what you said about the music video of the song?
Okay. And then maybe we could put our success my protest up there, and then a lot of people are gonna be inspired by it.
Okay. All right. And I'll reiterate if y'all didn't hear her. She was saying that she would like the public radio platform to help her and the rest of the young people in Oak Ridge show their humanity, show the fact that show how equal and how common they are to everyone else, and help relieve some barriers of people feeling like they may be different. Let them express who they are. And also you'd like the public radio to put out Success is My Protest because you see that as inspirational, and you want to give the people something to uplift their spirits and make them feel more alive and more connected, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. And what I would like to add is maybe like I would love for Iowa Public Radio representatives from there to share that career, to present that to kids as a possible pathway, for a career, and maybe even on a bigger scale, having a field trip for the kids to come and see what it looks like inside a radio studio, and maybe possibly like learn how to do some aspect of it. We're about like hands-on learning and cool experiences that can broaden their horizons. So that's what we would like.
Thank you so much. One thing that we have about 11 minutes left, but I want to make sure that I'm able to kind of recap here. I think the reason why we selected the panelists that we did for this is because each one of them, although very diverse and unique, they share a common philosophy in regard to barriers. And that is simply that, the only way to remove a barrier is to find that opportunity. And each one of these folks on the panel has spent a lifetime of finding ways to transform barriers into opportunities. And, right now I see such a diverse way of having these conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, barriers to access, barriers to success. And, I think most people realize that there are barriers and that there are issues, there are challenges. What I absolutely love about this group is their perspective on turning those challenges into opportunities. And, you know, the first time I talked to Emmett, his comment to me was, well, I really don't see barriers. So although I knew they were there, that's not my thing. My thing is seeing the success. And Jason and HC both said the same thing. And I think as long as we continue to focus on paths forward, ways that we can find intersectionality amongst our diversity, we can continue to have these really honest, transparent conversations. And I will say that I am still learning about how to have conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And even there are times when I am at a loss of words or the right questions. But all of us working together to be that opportunity, to be somebody that can help remove a barrier. When we think of opportunities, we often think of things. We don't often think of ourselves as that opportunity forward. And so, Emmett, you know, to go back to what you said, you became that opportunity. You didn't see others that really looked like you, but you did not see that as a barrier. What you did is you became the opportunity. And I just find that so powerful. You know, Stephen has asked, does anyone else have any questions in the last couple minutes? I will say that a couple comments. The culture buzz on KFMG serves the needs of independent promotion of the arts. So Emmett, actually all the panelists, everyone on the call, that sounds like a really great connector. We do have a question. How can arts organizations recruit industry professionals to the Des Moines community? Emmett, I'd like to, you know, since you are our permanent Des Moines resident here, I'd like to throw that question to you. What can people here do to actively recruit industry professionals to Des Moines from diverse backgrounds?
That's a really good question. So one thing I would say would be, I do see, as someone who's grown up in Des Moines, I've saw like some consistent growth in like the areas of art that I've been focusing on, and I imagine in all types of areas because of the work going on. So I would say organizations like Bravo that are out there putting dollars and moving like a good amount of funding behind these things. Like we have to keep Bravo supporting and doing what it's doing. We have to keep that's a tough one, because to be honest, what keeps me in Des Moines is more like emotional and like caring about, you know, giving back personally. I don't know about an outside artist having that same, and you know, that same type of drive. So I would, you know, I would respect that. But I think that the more that Des Moines continues to put funding behind the arts and make it more attractive, and more people begin to participate and more young people are brought up into like an appreciation of the arts, I think that'll happen naturally. Because I've seen Des Moines start like leveling up in the type of art it attracts, type of performers coming in, and like even the size of our festivals. So I see it going there, and that's kind of my take on it.
Thank you. I will say that anyone on today, please see HC's link on the chat box so that you can look at all of her amazing work. Jason Wells, so there will be a live stream tonight from the symphony. I'm not sure if Jason's actually playing in that or not, but you can see Jason perform with the Des Moines Symphony, of course. And you know, Emmett, I believe we've put the link to your video up here as well. Azjed, I've got folks on here saying that you are an incredibly talented, thoughtful, and well-spoken young lady. And everyone is very encouraged to see you here today. So again, we thank you for your attendance and your participation in today's conversation. Stephen, I'd like to toss it back to you one last time for any last comments you might like to make to our audience today.
If I can find that unmute button. I don't know what I could say. This has been very inspiring. I have made more notes today than I think I have made collectively. Just some really amazing ideas and amazing energy and synergies. Just really looking forward to continuing these conversations. There will be more. I believe we have the next one scheduled, Daphne, do we not?
We do. Our next session will be on Thursday, May 13th. And you can find all that information under the Impact tab on our website. I'll also be sending out an email this afternoon with a recording of this session, along with everyone's awesome links and how you can all connect.
Thank you, Daphne. Also, Megan, thanks so much. Megan is from the Symphony. She went ahead and put the link for the Symphony's live stream for this evening. So if anyone's interested, that information is there as well. Ben, wonderful seeing you here. Nice dog. I just happens to be the picture I can see. All right. Well, again, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time today, and we will look forward to seeing you in a few more months. If anyone has any questions, wants to find out how to register for the next event, or would like to get access to today's event, please reach out to Daphne or Stephen at the Des Moines Arts Festival. Thank you. Have a beautiful day.
Awesome, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Nice to meet everybody.
Stay warm.